see their blind spots in a way, or see those behaviors that are the predecessor to resistance, or understanding how to like identify the steps, or is there a predictability to it even? Let us understand like what that looks like as far as the approach, right? Like coming up to like failure or success of launching into moving into the next phase. Like what does that look like? Kind of like seeing those signs of resistance for individuals.
Ah, that is a difficult question to answer, because I don't think it looks the same for everyone.
For sure. But like
Um,
just like folks that you examples, maybe people you've worked with, maybe yourself, just like, because I know for me right now, I can see like, oh, there's this predictable way that like I kind of talk myself into or talk myself out of doing things. And I think that's resistance as well, right? It's like I'm resisting taking action by having engaging in this conversation that seems intelligent and strategic on some levels, but it's complete fucking bullshit, quite frankly. And at the same time, I know that about myself. So when I see it, I can be like, ah, you sneaky little motherfucker. Like, I see you. Oh, I see you. I'm gonna get you. And then I can pounce and I can be like, all right. All right. And there's a very predictable emotional tone to it. There's a very predictable, like, it's not fire. It's not like this. It's usually just subdued. It's usually kind of like, yeah. It's like shoulders shrugged. It's like soft in a bad way. It's limp, right? It's like not, it's just kind of, yeah.
Lifeless.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like, I'm just curious, have you seen things like that that look a different way, or like that's to give you a specific example? That's I laugh at
Yeah.
mine because I'm like, oh, it's just so dorky. It's so funny how that works. But anyways,
Yeah, there's a lifeless thing about it in some, yeah. Another I don't know, persona that I have seen is beating yourself up.
mm,
I should be doing this, and I should this, and should instead of just fucking doing it. Like sometimes it's like we get wrapped up in the checklist of like, oh, I have 12 different pages of checklists, and oh my gosh, and just sitting in the overwhelm of it instead of just like taking one of those things and going and doing it, and then taking another one and doing it. Because the amount of time that we spend worrying about a thing rather than fucking doing it, is a way that it pops up for sure. For me, recently, it's almost this weird counterintuitive thing. I have been resisting being still.
mm,
Um, and as a result, my whole self isn't in the project that I'm working on. So the moment that I actually like relax and surrender to stillness is when the creative process moves for me to be able to get into what I'm doing. And so I
mm-hmm,
have noticed that in other people too. They're so afraid of being still because they're afraid of their own thoughts. Um, and they're afraid of like, I don't know what this stillness looks like. I have to like, we're trained to be moving all of the time. And
absolutely.
in our society, like we're supposed to be doing this and supposed to be doing that. And I think in this time of coronavirus, that's part of the level of fear that's happening is that we've stopped and people have been forced to be still and they don't know
Yeah.
what to do with the thoughts that they have because they scare themselves.
hmm Maybe we should use some of that like advanced algebra we learned in school because it's really useful. Just kidding. Instead, that's the joke I make when it's like, we should have really learned like emotional intelligence and like, like emotion regulation and like how to really like understand what's going on biochemically, but also like psychologically and even spiritually to some degree. It's like instead, let's force feed them all of this stuff. It's so crazy. It's so whacked. Um, I like what you were just saying though, and what I'm seeing is like adjusting the dial, right? Like when
Mm-hmm.
we're moving at a particular pace, it can be very tempting and familiar even to continue moving really quickly because we're
Mm-hmm.
afraid to
Mm-hmm.
slow down. Because if we slow down, then it means this, that, and the other, and I should be doing something because if I'm not, then X, Y, and Z. But turning the dial really tunes us in to the frequency we really need to be at, right? That like a different cadence where we're not moving from a place of panic or we're not moving from a place of fear or overwhelm even, right? It's like we're moving at the pace we really need to be moving at to get all of the good stuff along the way and like bring that along with us into whatever needs to be expressed. So that's so, so good.
In
This is
in
go, yeah,
Okay.
go.
In the my training, I got my coaching certification through the Hendricks Institute, and they call that
Hmm.
essence pace. Um, and so on your walk, this is another thing you can learn about yourself on your walk is you play around with moving faster and slower and what feels like your speed in your body. And the more that I play around with that, like that's part of the reason I've been resisting slowing down is because my essence pace is slow as fuck.
Yeah.
But I have trained myself to be a doer so much, and I'm very organized. I like to get things done, and I want to be moving quickly, and I have all this stuff to do. But the reality is, if I don't slow down and move in my essence pace, then I'm not actually going to get the 100% Jess into the work that I'm doing. And so moving at my essence pace allows me to be more in my 100% self, to be able to give from that space rather than the 30% that I was at and then I do a shit job because of it.
Yeah. Do you find that there's different paces, or do you tend to have like a one, not one speed, but like do you function best in one way, or are you like across the board as far as like powering down, you're good, but then like that same cadence you can speed up a bit and be like doing more? Does it always have to be like a slow pace? It sounds like what you're describing is that you move when you move slower, things happen better. Is it always like that, or is it a variable pace?
I think the pace can be variable depending on what it is that I'm doing.
Mm,
Um, but like when I'm in high emotion, when I slow down, I'm able to drop in.
mm,
And other people have faster essence paces than I do. I've watched that happen, and it's really cool to see how people move differently and how they actually function really better at a fast pace. I am not that person. Um, but like within my own self, um, my pace will, I could be a little faster, a little slower, depending on what it is that I'm doing. But I
mm.
think that like that key piece of like when there's high emotion, if I am able to recognize like, wow, because it's not always like a physical movement, it's how my brain works. And so what happens with the high emotion is that my brain starts to go really fast. And if I would just slow down and drop into my body, then I will slow down a little bit and be able to use my whole person to make decisions rather than just trying to frantically come up with something that's half-assed.
Hmm. I like that. I like that a lot. Um, what I'm seeing and what I'm thinking about is kind of like this whole journey, right? That somebody may be on as far as moving into. I feel relationship is an interesting place, right? Because it's like we want to be in it 100%. But I know, like speaking for myself and a lot of people that I know personally, is like we feel like we also lose ourselves a lot in it, right? So coming back to ourself, is that something that we get to tune into, like, who am I now? Or is there a process of like, who was I before? Or is it like, what does that look like? You know, I'm kind of visualizing seeing like this land grab almost, right? It's like, what do I want in the future? Who was I in the past? Like, what was I interested in as a kid? Like, all of this stuff, like trying to like reassemble self, right? Like putting ourselves back together in a way. What does that process look like? I know it's different for everybody, but do you have a process that you help people kind of like walk through as far as like how to rediscover their passions or like find out what they're interested in again, or like what's give us a clue into what that looks like?
Invite people to make a list of things that they like doing or liked doing. It's both.
Hmm.
So it's whether they know it now or it's something from the past. And if they don't know what they like to do, I invite them to make a list and just play. Try it. Go to a movie by your, well, a lot of the examples I can think of right now are not applicable for right this minute, but
Oh,
go
you
to a
mean like
movie
in
by,
quarantine time, like go to movies by yourself? Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's one of my favorite things to do, honestly. I love that. It's so good. Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of people have never done it before, and it
Right.
can be a really fun experience.
A lot of people are scared to do it, in my opinion. You're like, I'll tell people, they're like, "Oh, you want to go?" I'm like, "No, I'm actually gonna go by myself." And they're like, "What?
Yep.
Like, what
Hmm.
are you talking about?" Like, yeah,
It's so fun. That's one of my favorite things to do too. I
for sure.
cannot wait until I get to do that again. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, go to a movie by yourself, go to an art museum, draw, read a book, write some poetry, color, um, pick a movie you normally wouldn't watch to watch, or like it's that pattern interruption and trying something new and playing with it
Hmm.
to discover if you even like it, because you don't know if you haven't tried, and if you haven't tried coloring since you were 7, you don't know if you still like it or not. Like,
Hmm.
and you can decide right away that you hate it and stop. Like, but like learn, like, oh, like someone that I'm working with recently rediscovered how much she loves writing poetry, and that's actually been a part of her saving grace, because in a breakup a lot of emotions come up and she's able to express them in her poetry. And like
Hmm.
that's the thing about those things that we love to do and like to do, is like generally those are the things that feed our soul. And so when you learn how to do those things and practice doing them on a regular basis, then when you are stepping into a new relationship, you can choose to continue to do those same things, because all of this is choice.
Hmm. So for people right now, maybe who are in a relationship and maybe like one person comes to mind, right? Like they were thinking about leaving that relationship before all this happened. And they were like so close, but they kind of like, they got cold feet a handful of times, even over like the last 6 months to actually pull the trigger and move forward and like leave that relationship. But didn't for X, Y, and Z and for the cacophony of reasons. Um, but now they're kind of like stuck. What can they do to successfully get through this time and even potentially use it to like assess if that's what they actually want to do? Because I think sometimes people leave a relationship um, because it's their pattern, right? It's because it's they've done it. They're like serial. You can literally see it. Like when it gets to this point in a relationship, they dip every fucking time. So it's like there's those people. But for the people who are like the conscious individuals who are looking at the whole landscape and being like, wow, do I really want to leave this? Is this something that I can fix? Like, how do people assess like what that looks like deciding, is this something that I should go through with or not? Especially right now during the coronavirus isolation, quarantine, lockdown, like a time, right? So it's like, what's that process look like? Or what would you suggest for them to kind of like look at it?
Well, I would argue that most situations, particularly in America, you are not stuck. Um, that is a choice you are making to stay stuck.
Hmm.
Um,
You mean specifically during this time right now?
mhm,
Okay, cool. Just getting clear
yeah,
on that. Yeah, yeah.
specifically now and before it even
Yep.
started. Like the like just because Corona is happening, that's just your new excuse. Um, you're not actually stuck. You can, like, not everything is shut down. And I imagine you have friends and family who would allow you to stay on their couch or whatever it is you need to do to move out of the situation that you're in. Um, that's not everyone. I know that there are always exceptions. Especially if you're from another country, then there's different cultural differences. I've had those conversations too. But um, an exercise of learning like what you want in that like specific scenario is oh, I wish I could easily find it. I have like this really, I'm gonna see if I could summarize it. But um you place like that thing that you want or don't want. Like, okay, say the thing is leaving the relationship. You visualize like something in the space that you're in, you visualize it as being the thing. So you have this ball. Actually, what do I have here? I do kind of have a ball. So this ball represents me leaving my relationship. And I put it somewhere in the room and I play around with the space and I walk toward it and I walk away from it. I put my back to it. Stand in front of it and feel what my body is feeling when I'm standing in those different spaces. And you will start to get a sense of what your body actually is like wanting to do. I did this about a year ago over something, and it was amazing to feel like when my back was turned to the thing, I realized how much I actually wanted it.
Hmm.
Um, and so I was able to lean in and then actually have some clarity around what I wanted rather than feeling like back and forth and back and forth. So like having a physical thing, or you just like focus your attention on it and play with the physical space, like getting your body moving around toward it, away from it, and see what happens in your body, and you might get some clarity around that.
Hmm. That's cool. That's unique. That's the first time I've ever heard that before. Super good. So, what part, I want to get a little personal. I'm curious, like what part of your journey was hardest for you? Was it leading up to it? Was it um, like what was it? What was, quite frankly, like what part was most painful for you to really acknowledge or come to terms with?
I think there's two things that come to mind. For my personal journey, um, what is kind of unique about it is that I was um, in South Korea when my husband was in the States, and we decided to separate. Now, I didn't go to Korea because of that. We had agreed that I was going there for a year. Um, it's something I had always wanted to do. It's not something that he wanted to come with me. And for a lot of different reasons, logistically, it made sense for us to do that. But while I was in Korea, there was a lot of distance rowing, and even though we have access to amazing technology, I would go like 2 weeks without hearing from him. And so being in this space of not knowing what was happening was really hard. And I could sense that we were nearing the end, but I didn't have clarity around it, and that's not what I wanted. Um, but in that space, I wanted him, like I needed him to also choose, and he was in um, limbo for a while because I think he was trying to make it work because he knew that's what I wanted too. Um, and to be honest, like I think that he kind of wanted it too, but it was like again, it was in the space of limbo. So that was the one of the hardest parts was just being halfway across the world and not knowing if we were going to be together or not. Um, and after that, coming to terms with my contribution to the end of our relationship was really hard. Admitting and taking 100% responsibility for my stuff was super hard.
Hmm. Do you mean your stuff that like led to the dissolve of the relationship or yeah.
Yeah. So up until that point, I had done a lot of blaming, right? Like,
Hmm.
he's not calling, he's not doing this, he's not putting in the effort, he's not, he's walking away and not growing with me, blah, 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 blah. But coming out on the other side of it, and I've spent a lot of time moving through, and I'm blessed and lucky enough to actually have been able to debrief my entire marriage with the person I was married to, which is a really cool thing, and I know unusual, but um, that's been some of the most sobering moments. Was like it's been really cool now, but when I was first starting to understand my contribution in how I was passive aggressive and how I lived in the victim part of the triangle, or I was trying to save him and it wasn't my responsibility to do that, and stuff like that. Coming to terms of those things that helped push him away was really hard.
Hmm. What were some of the ways that you like soothed yourself or like got to a point of like being able to, because that's a lot, like that distance with that amount of change. Um, like what were some ways that helped you get through that?
Being distant.
Well, I mean, like it sounds like when the relationship was dissolving, you were in Korea, right? And
Hmm.
he was in the States.
Hmm.
So like being in that uncertainty, going that amount of time without talking to him, like what were some ways that you were able to channel that worry or that energy and do something productive with it? Or not,
I
like
didn't
being real, like
really.
no, okay.
I didn't have a lot of the tools. Luckily,
Hmm.
I had a really good group of coworkers who
Hmm.
I would go out with and do some fun things with. And I, had a job, so I was forced to go teach children for 8 hours, which I actually really enjoy doing. So it got me out of that space just because I had a schedule and things to be doing. But I didn't have a lot of the tools, quite honestly. I spent a lot of time like in my room crying and watching TV and just kind of binge eating or not. Like I also got really physically sick around that time too, because our bodies like talk to us around that. So like the first
Oh
three
yeah.
months after my divorce, I was nauseous every day. Um, I lived on crackers and Gatorade for a while, because my body was just reacting to all of that. And I come from a Christian background, so all of me is telling me that this is wrong.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and
Come from
so
the same background. That's why I say absolutely, not because it is, but because it's like I totally relate. I went through a lot of the same stuff. Like my great great uncle is a saint for fuck's sake. So it's like, geez, I mean, come on now, it's like, yeah. So that's heavy. Right? It's a lot
yeah,
to channel. It's a lot to move
yeah,
through.
yeah, it was.
So like when you did start to move through it, like what would you say were some of the most liberating moments or like some of the biggest breakthroughs that helped you? It seems like, and I could be wrong, but it seems like there were a few moments that were very liberating that were like the bulk of the like like big breakthroughs and little breakthroughs along the way. What were some of those big breakthroughs?
Well, after there was a clear separation, I did three things that were imperative to my well-being. Um, and I don't know, I have no idea how I had the clarity of mind to do this. But the three things that I did was one, I I emailed a group of like 20 people that I'm really close to and told them what was happening. And I had this whole letter of like, this is what's going on. Morris and I are getting divorced. This is what I need. I know I'm halfway across the world, and I know that not all of you are available all the time. So when you think about me, check in on me. And I don't need you to fix this. This is not to be fixed. This is what's happening. Our marriage is over. This is what I need
Right.
from you. And I was very clear about what I needed, and those people were very wonderful and respecting those boundaries that I created and saying like having conversations with me, or then I would send an email every few days at the first like 2 weeks, and like one of them was like, okay, I need new music. All of the music I have reminds me of Morris. What are some of your favorite songs? And I made a new playlist with their recommendations. Um, and then the second thing I did, like I said, was I got a coach counselor, um, and I started meeting with her twice a month, and that helped. And she helped me through a lot of the bigger breakthroughs with giving me some tools and holding space with me. And then the third thing I did, I actually wrote a letter to myself,
Mm,
um, uh, like I was my best friend. Like, dear Jessica, I'm really sorry that you're going through a breakup, like a divorce. That sucks. This is awful. And nothing I can say is going to change how awful that is. And just like let myself be, because I found that a lot of people around grief don't know how to help, and they don't, and often say things that are really hurtful and not helpful at all. And so to be able to write a letter to myself of what exactly I needed to hear and then reread it when I needed to was really helpful.
mm, so good. Anything else that you know of that can help people in that type of transition? Like any other, like, does one other tool come to mind that could really help people kind of like snap out of grief, so to speak?
You can't snap out of grief. That's not how it works. There
Totally
is
a dude
no.
question, right? It's like, how do I get out of that? How do I kill that? How do I get rid of that thing?
You don't. You get to experience it. And
Mm,
I had, oh, I had such a beautiful journey today with replaying my grief. Actually, I'm working on a project right now, and I was really diving into that grief, and I actually have this deep gratitude for my grief now.
mm,
It's like I see how my grief protected me, because there's something beautiful about grief that allows you to move back and forth between feeling the pain and being numb.
mm,
And that numbness is actually a friend, because you can get into a space where you stay there and too long, and then that's not okay. But being able to move back and forth, because you cannot experience all of that pain at the same time with that such a great loss. So understanding that grief was my friend actually allowed me to move through the feelings that I had, because you cannot just tell grief to go away. You have to experience it, and you have to move through it. And there's what's her name? Elizabeth Kubler something. She came up with the stages of grief, and she actually created them around death. And there's a lot of myths around the stages of grief, but the thing is, they are not linear. I just actually listened to a podcast of Brene Brown and David Kessler, who worked closely with her, and he actually wrote a new book that talks about the sixth stage of grief, actually. Um, but he talked about that very early in the podcast. Is like, so many people try to put grief in this box, in this container. I'm like, okay, now I'm in this stage, and now I'm in this stage, and now I'm in this stage, and now I'm done. Like, that's not how grief works at all. Grief is very organic, and you kind of go back and forth between different stages, and the stages are just to help reference where you are. It's not like you have to go through all of the stages either. It's just to help name. Like, wow, I'm really angry. Oh, wow, I really hate that this person is gone and out of my life. Or, wow, I'm really sad today. Like, it's just a tool to help name the things, because being able to name things, I think we are story beings, and we're people that need to define. And so being able to define that is the ability to be like, oh, this is what I'm experiencing right now, and it's normal. Like, whatever it is that you're going through, like, with the grief, I know, like, as a whole planet, we're moving through grief in major ways right now. And it's if you are experiencing a death or a breakup on top of the global grief that's happening, that's a lot. It's a lot to be moving through. But the reality is, like, you can't just tell grief to go away. You